harvested. All right, once again, my name is Kurt Steinke. I'm the fertility specialist here at Michigan State. Again, I'll apologize up front. I have a little cough going on, so I'm going to cough about 50 times the next 15 minutes. So, excuse that. What a fantastic year to grow wheat, huh? Boy, lots and lots of discussion. Lots and lots of whoopses, lots and lots of, oh man, I'm never going to plant this stuff again. Lots of, man, what the heck happened? So what I want to talk about today is a couple different topics. I'll be the first to admit the wheat stand here is not the best. So some of the treatment effects that we see, I'm going to not talk all that much about. Until a couple weeks ago, I didn't know if we'd have a stop here. Just didn't look very well up here. But we can turn this into a teachable moment. So, N rates. Start looking at a lot of our wheat acres and what a difference 1 year can make. If you look at last year in the south central part of the state, about 135 units of N was our most economic optimum return on yield. Okay, about 135. This year, 135 units down there, we have wheat lying flat on the ground. What's the difference? Precipitation. Last year, I want to say April through about July 15, we received about 14 inches of rain down that neck of the woods. This year at this point, we're only about 7, and 4.5 of that came within about the last 2 weeks. So March and April were extremely dry in that part of the state. We got less than an inch of rain in each of those months. Now up here, that was one big difference. April here at the farm, we got about 4 inches. So much wetter in this neck of the woods than it was down in the south central portion of the state. So that's one big difference. So how does that relate to differences in N response? Well, we had a lot greater N loss conditions down in that part of the state last year. We leached a little more N, which is why we saw the most economic N rate increase compared to what it was this year. So again, this year we'll probably be down closer about that 90 unit or so to maximize yield, at least in the south central part of the state. So what we have going on here today, the first 4 plots you see here are either 140 or 70 units of N. The last 5 are all 100 units of N with different products, different management regimes, etc. And we'll talk about a few of those here now. The first plot you see here, 140 units of N applied at green up. Second one, 140 units split between green up and Feeks 6. Third one, 140 units split between green up and Feeks 6 with Palisade applied at Feeks 6. Now Palisade's a plant growth regulator. And the fourth one, 70 units of N applied at green up. So we'll start by talking about the idea of the split application. When should we do it? Why should we do it? Do we always see a response? So the idea of a split application, okay, it's nothing new. The idea is you apply the N closer to the peak time of crop N uptake. Okay, what does that do? Basically limits the opportunities for nitrogen loss. Okay, so you have a fewer number of days where you have N out there that's subject to that 3-inch rain that we're going to get, or that 3 consecutive days of an inch of rain each. So you reduce your opportunities for N loss. So last year, the difference between green up and a green up / Feeks 5 wheat yield, we gained about 7 bushels by getting away from that all green up application. Now last year, when we waited to Feeks 7, we lost about a dozen or more bushels per acre by waiting till Feeks 7 as opposed to Feeks 5. So it's not always a guarantee waiting on that split. There is some risk. What's the risk? Well, when you apply that N, you got to get precipitation to wash it into the ground and get it into the plant. Okay, if you wait on that split and get that N down, N on the ground isn't N in the plant. So if all of a sudden the faucet shuts off, that N does not get into the plant. And that's where we lost a lot of our wheat yield last year. Okay, we went from close to 100, if not breaking 100 bushels, down to about 80 by waiting from a Feeks 5 to a Feeks 7 application. This year could be a completely different story. We've had a fairly wet in this neck of the woods, April, May, and now June. You may see a benefit waiting a little longer with that Feeks 7 application, or waiting till that Feeks 7 as opposed to like a Feeks 5. Or in some cases, even waiting to flag leaf. You can see we got a plot number 5 down here where we have 100 units of N, 70 at green up, 30 at flag leaf. That looks just as good, if not better, than 140 units applied at green up. Well, we've had moisture. So that flag leaf application got that N into the plant. So that's always the what if or but when you talk about soil fertility. It's a lot different than when you talk about herbicide or fungicide applications. Because why? It depends on the weather. And believe it or not, I can't predict the weather. I wish I could, which is why we have to have all of these different perspectives or management schemes simply based on our weather patterns. If it's dry, if it's wet, it's going to behave differently in the field. Next topic. This plot right here, 140 units of N with a split with Palisade. Now, Palisade is a plant growth regulator. Plant growth regulator keeps plant from growing upwards. But physiologically, it changes some of the sugar and carbohydrate metabolism in the plant. So if you keep that plant from growing upwards, you have more sugars and carbohydrates going downwards in the plant that then can support increased root growth. You get greater root growth, what can happen? You can tap into more N, P, K, manganese, magnesium, etc. and basically create a healthier plant. So that's the idea of using something like a plant growth regulator on our wheat acres. You really limit the height. So you can see, just looking across here, the big height drop that we get starting about here and moving over. It's from Palisade. So is there potential for that in wheat? I think so. We don't want big, long, stemmy wheat because you increase your risk of lodging. Okay, so you start talking about to some growers where they envision using Palisade. It's only the high input approach where you can push and really juice your wheat and not have to worry about lodging because you got Palisade down. But we're looking at it from a little different perspective. Can we use it even on a lower input stand? Because what happens if you decrease your top growth, you're not going to need as much N because you don't have as much top growth there. So can you even cut back on your N rates a little bit? And go maybe 20, 25, even maybe up to a third less with using something like a plant growth regulator. Okay, because you basically get more bang for your buck because you're not just forming top growth. The other thing a plant growth regulator can do is stimulate tillering. So instead of forming a lot of excessive top growth, can you get a greater number of tillers to grow from the crown of that plant? Okay, we really don't know. So we're testing it out in a couple different management regimes to see where we can go with it. And it's not a new compound. Okay, the active in Palisade has been used in the turf market since about 89, 90. Okay, if you're talking, how far is that now? 25 years, believe it or not. They've used it there extensively for some of these same reasons. The other thing it does, it greens it up beautifully. Okay, gives it that nice green color, really concentrates the chlorophyll. A couple other items we're going to talk about as we go down here. You can see the other 5 plots that we have here. We have the split application with flag leaf. Next one down, we have 100 units of N as Super U. Okay, now remember Super U is a urease and nitrification inhibitor. It's both. I'll talk about that in a second. Next one down from there is 100 units of N with agrotane. Agrotane is a urease inhibitor only. Next one down from there, we got urea, ammonium sulfate, and ESN cocktail. And then the last plot down towards the end, it's 75 units of N with 25 units of urea. So predominantly a slow release N plot. So there's lots of discussion on the N extender and stabilizer products. So remember, how do we use them? When do we use them? How do they work? Remember, urease inhibitor does what? Keeps N from volatilizing up in the atmosphere. So anytime you surface apply nitrogen, you run the risk of losing or volatilizing a third to half of your N up into the atmosphere within about the next week. Even shorter than that. In some cases, it can be 2-3 days. How do we apply most of our N in wheat? We got to surface apply it. We can't work it in. All right? So, in some cases, it makes sense to use that. But again, it depends on N loss conditions. Last year, we saw about a 4 bushel increase with using a urease inhibitor on wheat. Now, if you have a urease and nitrification inhibitor, it's a little different. The nitrification inhibitor keeps N as ammonium in the soil and keeps it from converting to nitrate. So what's the big deal? Well, ammonium's positively charged. Soil's negatively charged, right? So opposites attract. So you can think of it like a paper clip. Paper clips that ammonium to the soil so you don't lose it. If it gets to that nitrate form, nitrate's negatively charged, soil's negatively charged, like charges repel, your nitrate leaches downward. But you have to have N loss conditions. You have to have N limiting conditions to see a positive response, especially to a nitrification inhibitor. So what we've seen in a lot of other crops, if you do go the nitrification inhibitor route, typically we recommend cutting your N rate anywhere from about 10 to 20%. Because you got to pay for the cost of that product somehow. Okay, and that's where some of the cost savings will come in. And it will not be a guaranteed yield increase every year. So last year we had a fairly wet spring. Using a urease and nitrification inhibitor, we saw a 12 bushel or more increase in our wheat yields. So it more than paid for itself. This year, because we had a fairly dry spring early on, up until late, I have my doubts as to whether we'll see any positive yield response. But I've been fooled before. The other thing to look at as you go further down, we have slow release nitrogen. Now slow release nitrogen is a little different than some of the other products. It's not like an N extender or an N inhibitor product. Basically the N bleeds out over or outside of a prill, a plastic coated prill of urea, over a long period of time, about 60 to 80 days. Okay, so it's more of an actual slow release, not just inhibits for a period of time and then releases it. Okay, it bleeds it out over a longer period of time, which may or may not lead to a positive response. We haven't seen a great response with some of the slow release N on wheat. We've seen about the same response with slow release N as we do spring applied urea on our winter wheat. Now that could change this year because it's been fairly wet as of late. But the risk factor you run that you got to think about is if you use a slow release N product, you still need water. Because if the faucet shuts off and you don't have water, what's going to happen? You can't get water to penetrate that prill. That N will not bleed out of that prill of fertilizer, and it will sit there. And it will sit there and sit there until you get water. So again, there is a little bit of risk with any of these products because, again, we can't predict the weather. Have a sulfur plot down there. Haven't seen a tremendous response to sulfur the last couple of years. I can't say fall versus spring applied, we've seen about the same response. So if you are debating using S on wheat, probably go with the spring application. We see the same response. The other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was what you see here. So in these 3 buckets, how many N rates do you think we have? Because here we got about 40-inch wheat, 36-inch wheat, about 32-inch wheat. Think it's 3 N rates? How about cultivar? Think it's all the same? Think it's different? What do we got going on? Any ideas? Bingo! It's all the same N rate, all the same cultivar, and what a year to have a planting date study. Think about wheat yield potential. It starts in September with planting date. Here we have September 17th planting date, which was a little early. Okay, Hessian fly free was 20 or 21, but it was going to rain after the 17th, so we wanted to get it in. Here we have October 11. Here we have October 28. Okay. First week in December, 5 tillers a plant. First week in December, 2 tillers per plant. First week in December, 0 tillers per plant. Mid-March, 7 tillers per plant. Mid-March, 3 to 4 tillers per plant. Mid-March, 1 or less tillers per plant. So you start talking about tillering, It's not just an end rate issue, it's about planting date. And it all starts in the fall, which is why we stress planting date. So our goal with this study, we have 3 planting dates, we have 3 end rates, 75, 105, and 135, and we have 3 application timings. All at green up, 50-50, green up and Feeks 5, and all at Feeks 5. So it's a 3 by 3 by 3 factorial study for 27 total treatments. So our goal is to cater an end management regime that can apply to every grower across the state of Michigan. Because if there's 1,000 wheat growers in the state, you're going to have 1,000 different planting dates. And your end response will vary simply by that individual grower's planting date. So that's what we're trying to take a look at. Now here, that earlier planted stuff, probably close to about 75 units of N is you're going to get your optimal yield. Because everything else above that right now is almost lying flat on the ground. It's lodged. Okay, it was just too juicy. That storm that we had to come through the Monday before last put a lot of it down. But that's kind of the idea that we have here. Can we cut our end rates simply by planting date? Or can we tweak our end rates simply by planting date? Because the goal of end application in wheat is for tiller development and to get protein in the plant. So if you have something that's sufficiently tillered going into spring, 1, you may not need as much N, but 2, can you delay that N application until you get to that peak time of wheat N uptake? Because you don't want to promote many more than 7 tillers per plant if it's already at that point in mid-March. Okay, you don't need that. You're past that stage. So then it becomes N loss opportunities. If I can delay my N application, I decrease my opportunities for N loss from those 2, 3, and 4 inch rains that we now commonly get. So we can kind of tweak a management program simply based on planting date. So we're going to look at this over the next couple of years. And then from there, we might look at some more crop rotation issues with planting date. The sky's the limit with yield potential with winter wheat in Michigan. Okay, I think we have a lot of opportunity to improve simply based on our crop diversity. There aren't too many other states that have both dry beans and sugar beets in a common rotation. Okay, we have a lot of opportunity here to tweak our winter wheat management regime. The other thing to think about, look at some of the height issues that we see here. Okay, now height can be our enemy, without a doubt. But that's where something like this might come in, where you got a plant growth regulator that you can then use on that earlier planted wheat. So instead of getting 40-inch wheat, I might be able to keep it at 32-inch wheat, but still get 7 tillers per plant. Okay, that's how we can kind of intermingle and twist and kind of create our own management scheme for that individual wheat grower, because everybody is different. So I'll wrap it up there. If there's any questions, concerns, I will be around most of the day. Otherwise, I appreciate everybody's time, and I'll take any questions. I should say, seeding rate for all these was the same at 1.6 million seeds per acre. We wanted to avoid that seeding rate issue. So I know a lot of growers, you get later in the season, you jack the seeding rate. But that confounds differences with planting date. Is it a planting date issue or is it a seeding rate issue with regard to tiller development? So we wanted to keep it all one seeding rate to get at the root effect of planting date. So that other stuff we'll tackle as we go on, but we want to tackle one stone at a time.
What's in the other 2 buckets?
The other 2 buckets I threw up here, looking at some of what we're seeing in our wheat acres now. Check plot, you can start to see the yellowing. It's just starting to occur now. Here we got 90 units of N. We did some head counts, tiller counts, etc. We'll do that with everything across the board here in the next about 2-3 weeks or so, just to look at differences in head counts with some of the inhibitor products, the urease inhibitor, nitrification inhibitor, slow release. Do we see any differences in head counts? So typically the old adage is you want to get about 600 heads per square yard in order to get 100 bushel wheat. Can we tweak that a little bit based with some of those products or some of these products, or even based on planting date?
I understand your planting date, but is there a point where you get too much foliage in the fall? Can it get too tall? Or?
Yes, if it gets too juicy, as I like to say it, too much moisture in the plant in the fall, it will not become winter hardy in time or properly. And you end up with too much moisture in the plant. What happens with moisture in the plant? Come wintertime, you get intercellular freezing, that plant will basically implode. So yes, that can be a concern, and that's one thing we are going to take a look at that. So it's not just, well, I'm going to plant as early as I can then. Heck, September 10th No. We don't want to go that route. There is a limit. And you still have to look at that Hessian fly free date.